It's great when a player shows some new skills over the first month, but how about if they show multiple new skills at once? My guest Ryan Bloomfield and I will be going over a handful of players doing just that right here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Sunday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Prize Picks. Erik Halterman here, joined by my guest, Ryan Bloomfield of Baseball HQ, co-host of the Bubba and the Bloom podcast. And Ryan, I'm sure you're a wonderful, well-rounded person, but for the purposes of this hour, are you okay to identify as a spreadsheet guy?
I am. I can identify as many things. Spreadsheet guy, one of them. And first, thanks for having me on. But and B, I have to applaud your attempt at the spreadsheets today. They're looking good, man.
Yeah, of course. Ryan is one of my favorite Twitter followers, or favorite Twitter follows. I guess you probably follow me back, so maybe you're one of my favorite.
I do. It's well. The feeling's mutual.
Good. There we go. Well, and if you are not yet following Ryan, you absolutely should, because full of excellent visuals in addition to all sorts of analysis. But you've really got the visual game down, the spreadsheet game down, and I am doing my best to copy you today. I've got some knockoff Bloom boards that we're looking at here. Copied your style as best I can. We are going to be taking a look at first some hitters who are improving in their chase rate, their contact rate, and their hard hit rate all at the same time. And then we're going to take a look at some pitchers who are improving in their strikeout rate, walk rate, and ground ball rate all at the same time. Got to figure if you're doing a lot of good things at once through a month, that's probably more notable than doing just one. And definitely there are some names on these lists who look pretty interesting. But first, let's get to some of the headlines from the past 24 hours. A lot of the headlines are performance related, starting with Christian Scott. Christian Scott, the exciting starting pitching prospect for the Mets, had quite a good debut against the Rays. 6 2/3 innings, 1 run on 5 hits and 1 walk while striking out 6. Great news if you like Christian Scott, although maybe sort of not great news, because if you wanted to pick him up for an affordable price this weekend, you're probably not going to.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's great news if you have him, if you're in a dynasty, keeper league, whatever. Yeah, not so great in terms of market value and where Christian Scott will go in fab leagues this evening. Impressive performance from Scott. Not that we would expect anything different, really, given what we've seen from Scott last year in spring training and in AAA this year. So I don't think it adds very much to say that Scott's very good. I think he's a very high priority add. It's more, you got to look at your team, think about how much, like if you're willing to go I think in like 15 team NFBC leagues, Christian Scott is probably going north of $200 tonight. Are you willing to drop 30% of your fab budget on one player? Sometimes that works out. Sometimes you need to. Obviously, starting pitcher injuries have been the highlight, unfortunately, or maybe the low light of the 2024 season. So there are some teams that are desperate. It's just something you need to think about if you want to put all your proverbial fab eggs in that one basket. I think Christian Scott can be worth it. The skills are there. I think he sticks in the Mets rotation. And he's got, I think, enough high minors experience that this isn't just someone getting thrown into the fire. But that's what you're going to have to think about as a fantasy manager this evening, is if you're ready to plop that much onto one guy.
Yeah, and when you're making that decision, what do you think is a bigger factor for you? Is it how desperately you need starting pitching, or is it more what you've spent already? For example, if you've had to throw $200 at Jason Foley or Kirby Yates, are you just taking yourself out of the running, saying, you know what, I got to save some money. I can't do too many of these. So as much as I love Scott, somebody else is going to get him.
I think it's more, I don't think it's as much what you've already spent. I think it's more where your roster is at right now and how badly do you need that starting pitcher. I know I've got a few teams. I have a team that started with Spencer Strider, Yuri Perez, and Merrill Kelly, and like as my top 3 starting pitchers. And it's like on that team, kind of, I'm going to be dipping my my toe in those waters. And other teams where I don't need them as much, I'm probably out of the bidding. So I think so much depends on the health, really, of your starting pitching staff.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. But if you're in a position where you can afford to go for Scott and it makes sense for you to go for Scott, I'll be going for him right there along with you. I think this is the one to go for. If you look at your team at the end of the year and you think, well, I want to have added one or two big names in Fab, this is one that you want to. Question about who the big arm to come up after Scott is. Could be Cade Horton. Maybe he is the next highest ranked prospect on James Anderson's top 400 with a 2024 debut, other than Paul Skeens, who isn't going to be somebody you can add because he's added everywhere, and Jackson Jobe, who I believe just suffered an injury. So Cade Horton would be the name to watch. Maybe Hurston Waldrop with Atlanta if he eventually gets a shot there. But Scott is the exciting name, definitely, and is going to deserve those giant bids. You got more names in there?
I'll just throw Robert Gasser out there as well, who may have been of Milwaukee, who may have started the year in the rotation, but had I think it was a shoulder injury, but he is back and throwing in AAA and maybe up, health permitting, sometime soon too.
Yeah, so as always, there are going to be a handful of names, but I really do think that we're starting with one of the best of the year. So don't be afraid to throw out those big numbers pretty early on here. Another exciting pitching performance from yesterday, a season debut in this case. John Means working back from elbow forearm issues, which affected him late in the season last year, I guess in the playoffs even, is when they first popped up in October. It's about a month behind to start his 2024 season, but certainly didn't look behind. 7 scoreless innings, 8 strikeouts, just 1 walk. We haven't really seen healthy John Means unleashed at the new version of Camden Yards. And I hadn't been too much of a John Means fan previously, as somebody who just never really runs a high strikeout rate, mostly succeeds through control, isn't the most exciting fantasy profile. But on this Baltimore team in this Baltimore park, I should probably start getting pretty excited about John Means, no?
I think so. The weird thing with John Means was he was getting just lit up pretty much every start in his rehab. And maybe that's just, you ignore the results of rehabs and you focus more on the health and the pitch count and how the player feels. But and maybe he was just trying things out. But John Means, I think, had a double-digit ERA in the minors this year through his few rehab starts. So to see Means come out and shove was quite surprising to me. Biggest thing for me that I was surprised with is just the number of whiffs that John Means produced. Like you said, Erik, not a big strikeout guy, always great control, always throws a ton of strikes. And I, and like you said, the new Baltimore park, or the new wall, I guess, is certainly going to help. I think that wall was almost built for John Means and then he got hurt. But obviously the run support in Baltimore will be there as well. So John Means certainly not at the Christian Scott level of bidding this evening, but certainly someone who I think is more like a, I don't know, SP 3 or 4 type. Unless this like rise in whiff rate from his first start, and you don't want to overact to one start, unless that increases a bunch. I can't put Means any higher than that, just because the strikeout ceiling I think is pretty low.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm noticing the strikeouts here, and if we get 2 or 3 more outings of similar numbers, then all of a sudden we start reassessing, but not quite yet. Sticking in Baltimore, we had Craig Kimbrell pulled from a save situation last night, allowed a run on 2 hits and a walk in just 1/3 of an inning. Yenier Cano took over and recorded his first save of the year. So I guess I should apologize to my Saturday co-host, Ryan Boyer. He actually had Yenier Cano on our Fab podcast outline yesterday, and I said, well, do we really want him on there? Because I think he put him on the outline, and then Craig Kimbrell came back from his back issues and got a save. So I said, maybe we should take Cano off. And then just hours later, Craig Kimbrell is pulled from a save situation and Yenier Cano's getting a save. So something to watch, or something that suggests a more immediate change here. What do you think's going on in Baltimore?
I gave Danny Coulomb a similar treatment. I write a Fab column for Baseball HQ every week as well. And I wrote that blurb up yesterday morning, was like, yeah, Kimbrell's back. I wouldn't bid on Danny Coulomb. Like quintessential closers, right, man? You get Craig Kimbrell, who goes out with back tightness, and you're like, oh, maybe IL stint, maybe I will go for Cano or whoever. Comes back, strikes out the side on I think Friday night, and it's like, all right, we're good. And then Saturday happens, and it's just like this roller coaster. That is closers in a nutshell in fantasy baseball. Unless Saturday's hiccup is back related again, I haven't seen any reports Sunday morning from Kimbrell. Maybe we'll get something closer to game time. I'm not too worried. I think Craig Kimbrell has like the longest leash of any closer, one of the longest leashes out there. I mean, they signed Craig Kimbrell to be the closer. I don't think they like Cano in that 9th inning spot either. So unless it's injury related or velocity was down or something like that, I'm not too concerned about Kimbrell. It's just those ebbs and flows of life in the 9th inning.
That's true. I would say maybe Kimbrell wouldn't have a long leash just because of his shaky performance the last couple of years, but the Orioles did sign him knowing about that. It's not as if they need us to tell him that, hey, by the way, this Craig Kimbrell guy isn't quite the guy he was earlier in his career. They can see the same stats. So they were prepared for this experience with Craig Kimbrell. It is worth pointing out that we're recording fairly early here today. And if we see, I think it's pretty likely that we see more news on this, whether or not it is a back-related struggle or just a bad outing. Like you said, I think there's a decent chance we hear something before you have to make your fab bids tonight, which could affect that. But I'm right there with you until we do. Some minor is maybe the wrong word, but less certain injuries that we're tracking here. George Kirby underwent an MRI on his right knee. There was news he was pulled from his start Friday. Just 1 inning early, maybe. He had thrown 6 innings, 88 pitches, which is a full start for everybody except for George Kirby. But he was pulled early for him with knee issues that apparently have been bothering him for a couple weeks, which aren't good. But then again, he's been pitching through them for a couple weeks, so they're probably not that bad. I guess if we hear bad news from this MRI, we could be expecting an IL stint, but otherwise, probably something he can handle.
Yeah, pretty weird how they're kind of handling it. It sounded, very precautionary, and then all of a sudden MRI. And then, like you said, Eric, it's been the last couple of weeks, which George Kirby's been awesome over the last couple of weeks. So I don't know. We'll see. They've got Brian Wu. Seattle has Brian Wu coming back. So I think if there was an IL stint coming, probably Brian Wu stays in the rotation and Emerson Hancock stays in the rotation. If it is deemed minor and George Kirby sticks, it might be time to move on from Emerson Hancock, which hopefully a bunch of you don't have to do because you're in league shallow enough to not have to bid and roster Emerson Hancock.
Yep, a couple more starts for him, maybe, if for some reason you were relying on Emerson Hancock. We'll keep an eye on that one. Another injury to keep an eye on, Stephen Kwan. He is needing an MRI on his hamstring, and he's out of the lineup for Sunday's game against the Angels. He left Saturday's game after tweaking his hamstring while chasing down a fly ball. This one could be tough. A hamstring is usually more than just a day or two, and sometimes, could be 6-8 weeks. That's what Trey Turner's got right now. So potentially could be without Stephen Kwan for some time, which would be a blow because he's having a pretty good season so far. Pretty good, might even be understating it. 353 batting average, 3 home runs, which for him is halfway to his career high.
Yeah, the typical elite plate approach from Stephen Kwan, now paired with almost as many barrels this season as Stephen Kwan had all of 2023. So would be a shame. And I agree, this does have like Trey Turner vibes. I mean, I have no idea in Kwan's specific case, but it is that kind of, all right, hamstring, we'll get it looked at, boom, all of a sudden at least 6 weeks. So would be a shame for Stephen Kwan. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and we are about to move on to our guys improving on all their skills at the same time, but we do have a question on an interesting player here in the chat that I want to get in real quick. Your thoughts on Andy Pajes, who's gotten off to a strong start, a 410 WOBA with some great hard hit rates and barrel rates. It's the start we were hoping to see from Andy Pajes.
Absolutely, man. And I think no one expects this to continue from Andy Pajes, but what I see is 20% strikeout rate, which is fantastic in his first kind of exposure to major league pitching. Already 5 barrels in those 70 plate appearances. But most importantly, I think Andy Pajes has shown that he deserves to play every day in the best lineup in baseball. And I think that's absolutely huge. So Andy Pajes is looking looking fantastic. Again, not going to keep this up, but if you have someone with above average skills in the best lineup in baseball, I know he's hitting, down the lineup, but whatever, turns around quite often. Very, very impressed by Andy Paz, specifically with the hit tool and the plate discipline that you're seeing. A lot of times that goes haywire when these prospects get called up the first time to the majors. So impressive start.
Yeah, it's a nice reminder for Paez because he struck out 50% of the time through his first 4 games, which, it's only 4 games. He's down to 21% strikeout rate. There's a whole bunch of prospects got called up this week. Jordan Beck, Joey Loperfido striking out a bit too much in, about 4 games. It's good to remember Andy Paez's name and know that, hey, guess what? Your strikeout rate through 4 games is not necessarily your strikeout rate for the rest of your career. We are going to go first to our hitters doing all the right things. But first, this message from our sponsor, Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. And hey, you can even use RotoWire's picks tool to help you with that. For example, I'm just checking out our MLB suggestions for the day, and I already like it because I see Christopher Morel going more than 1/2 total bases is our top projection of the day. So that has to be right, I would say. Looks like we're also saying less on Garrett Crochet's strikeouts, less than 6 strikeouts, for example. We're also down on Joe Ryan's fantasy score versus the Red Sox today. So we can offer you a whole bunch of help with your Prize Picks at the RotoWire Picks tool. Quick withdrawals, easy game plan, and enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Download the app today and use code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. That's promo code ROTOPOD for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Thank you to our sponsor, Prize Picks. We're now back here on the Sunday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman here with my guest, Ryan Bloomfield. And we're now on to the main topic of the day, where I try to figure out what this present button on my screen does. And I try to do my best Ryan Bloomfield impression and show off a little spreadsheet that I've got going for us here. So, hey, it worked.
Strong execution. I know from experience, because we do these on the Bubba and the Bloom podcast. Pulling that screen up live seamlessly, I still don't have it perfectly down. I must say, Erik, as the creator of these Bloom boards, your I wouldn't even call them knockoff version, man. This is solid. You've got the names in bold. You've got the center justified. I'm just reviewing. This is how bad it gets. I'm reviewing your spreadsheet format. You got the center justified.
I think my
columns.
Spreadsheet guy comment may have been correct.
Yeah, I get fired up over this stuff, man.
Yeah,
and then you've got the color coded skills. This is a strong attempt.
Well, yeah, I'm doing my best. I may or may not have directly copied what I've seen from you over on the Bubba and the Bloom podcast here. So what we've got going on for anybody following along on YouTube, and of course, we're not going to focus too much on the visuals because plenty of people are just listening. But what we've got here, first, we're looking at hitters. I've split up the hitters into 2 tabs. We're going to start with the drafted hitters. These are hitters who were drafted in at least a quarter of the RotoWire online championship leagues. We'll then move on to hitters who were not drafted very often, if at all. These are hitters who have improved in all 3 of the following stats. They are chasing less than they chased last year. They are making contact with more of their swings than last year, and their hard hit rate is higher than it was last year. So pretty good array of skills, I think, that if you're doing all of these at once, you pretty much have to be doing something right. I mean, Nolan Jones's name is at the very bottom of this list, so maybe not the guys who made the smallest possible improvements here, but pretty much, especially at the top, if you're reaching less, making more contact, and making harder contact, we better pay attention.
Yep, absolutely. And yeah, in the Nolan Jones case, it is at the bottom there, and slightly improved from terrible last season is probably what I'd go there. But interesting to see Vinnie P at the top, man.
Yeah, so the way I've sorted this, I made some score column, which is basically just summing up the changes compared to last year's numbers. So Vinnie Pasquantino is the top improver in this trio of skills among players who have at least 50 plate appearances both last year and this year. He's chasing far less, looks like the biggest improvement in chase rate on this page. He is making much more contact, and he's making much harder contact. All three of his improvements here are pretty substantial. That's got to be pretty exciting. And this is for a player who, if you remember, there were people wondering if they should be dropping Vinnie Pasquantino after just a week or two. The numbers, the results weren't there, but this look shows that he's been doing the underlying things probably the whole season quite well.
Absolutely. And if we're talking trading leagues and buy low opportunities and that sort of thing, I think the cherry on the top here for Vinnie Pasquantino is he's still only hitting 225 despite all this. And you look immediately where I go to look is what does that BABIP look like, that batting average on balls in play? 219 for Vinnie P. Like, so he despite all of these improvements beneath the surface, Vinnie Pasquantino is still getting BABIP'd, and I think this is more of like a 270 type hitter. The way that the way that these plate discipline metrics shake out, the hard hit is the biggest thing for me. It's great to see plate discipline improvements, but if you're not hitting the ball hard, I don't care as much. Vinnie Pasquantino does have that hard hit increase in already 7 barrels on 4 home runs, so that's great to see. I almost wonder, Erik, and I make this point a lot of times for 5x5 roto leagues, is he too passive at the plate? Vinnie P has always been a big walk guy, 14% walk rate this season. In OBP and points formats, that is awesome. I'd almost like to see a little bit more aggressiveness, or maybe a little bit more to back to what Vinnie P showed last year in terms of trying to make that contact. He's making the contact, but he's also pretty passive at the plate. And a walk in the box score, especially for someone that doesn't run like Vinnie Pasquantino, a walk in the box score in your 5x5 leagues are just kind of neutral, you know?
I think that is a great point. I think that is probably holding him back from fully maximizing his roto fantasy value. And of course, walks are one area where roto fantasy value and real life value differ. So maybe he's never going to have the incentive to change that. Although I would make the counterpoint that if we're talking about young hitter skill sets, and maybe Pasquantino isn't totally that anymore. This is his age 26 season, but he's still pretty new into his career, only 165 MLB games under his belt because he missed time with an injury last year. For a young hitter skill set, having this kind of eye, if it skews a little bit too much towards passivity, that's okay, because I think you can make a mental shift and become less passive. And that's probably easier than, becoming better at making contact or hitting the ball 20 feet harder or something. So as far as flaws for a young guy to have, I think I kind of like that flaw.
Agreed. And I think the biggest thing that you said there too, Erik, is it's almost an approach change or a mental flip. We're seeing this with Gunnar Henderson, who I made the case was way too passive at the plate last season. And for a young player to have that skill is a good thing overall, because they can, I don't want to say it's as easy as flipping a switch, but they I'd rather have this ability than not. And again, we're seeing that with Gunnar Henderson and a little bit Adley Rutschman over in Baltimore as well.
Yeah, Henderson did it dramatically, and I wasn't sure what to do after the first month or so when we saw the plate discipline flipped. He used to be a high walk, low strikeout guy, I think, or at least a very high walk guy, and suddenly he's a low walk, high strikeout guy with great results. And it took me at least a month to believe that it was actually going to work, but it's pretty clear that it's working at this point. How about Brice Turang, who's second on this list? Really like to see that Brice Turang is doing some good things at the plate, because we know he can do good things once he gets on base. Last year, he stole 26 bases in 137 games, despite a 285 on base percentage. Now, the hard hit over there is pretty red, so Brice Turang remains a limited player. But if he's making substantial gains in the pitches he chooses to swing at and his ability to hit those pitches, that's pretty good.
Agreed. And this is someone who, I'm fine with the passive plate approach for roto and fantasy, because Brice Turang is so good on the base pass. He is, I believe, 14 for 14, a perfect record on the base pass. So Brice Turang is making the skill set work, hitting over 300. BABIP's a little high, but like I don't know. This is a very strong batting average floor for Brice Turang. You did mention the red for hard hit rate at 33%. Hard hit rate, but Brice Turang doesn't need to be this power hitter. If he can just be, I think for our purposes, a non-zero in power and already has 3 barrels in 116 plate appearances. Again, that's not like a ton, but maybe you pair this excellent batting average with the elite stolen base upside with 10 home runs. Like that's all I'm kind of looking for. So very, very impressive games from Brice Turang. The thing I'd still like to see, the last kind of flaw, so to speak, in this skill set is the performance against left-handed pitching. Brice Turang has a 497 career OPS against lefties. Has improved. It's just 17 plate appearances so far this year against lefties. So Milwaukee really isn't letting Brice Turang play. I'd like to see them give Turang a shot more often against left-handed pitching. You don't know if someone can not hit lefties if you don't give them the chance to.
Yeah, and that's always the toughest call is, are you supposed to be thinking about whether or not this guy can hit lefties in 4 or 5 years and get him those reps now? Or are you supposed to try to think about winning tonight's game?
Right.
But maybe Brice Turang, if he improves his performance against righties enough, then the Brewers will start thinking, oh, well, if he's 15, 20% worse against lefties, that's still good enough, and he'll get some chances. Next guy on the list, Brenton Doyle, maybe similar to Brice Turang in that if he can run enough, that if he can just do the other things, there's maybe actually an interesting player here. Brenton Doyle, still terrible strikeout and walk numbers, but he's got a 106 WRC plus this year, which is a lot higher than his 43 mark from last season. He's doing all the right things here. Again, he's hitting the ball harder, he's hitting the ball more often, and he's choosing better pitches to swing at.
And this is kind of the nice thing of these boards. It's like you get to, I don't know, dive into a player that, at least for me, I don't really have on many of my teams. And I certainly did not realize Brenton Doyle was hitting 288. That's wild. Yeah. Yes, it's a 408 BABIP. So like I still think this is the same guy in terms of like it's a good power speed profile, especially at home. And Coors Field even helps batting average even more than power and home runs. So I still think of Brenton Doyle as more of a home streamer, but good to see, I guess, the improvement in plate approach. However, it is still like he's gone from one of the worst plate approaches to a merely bad one, but still you still like to see the improvement. And I mean, the other big thing with Doyle is he does play every single day, and you want plate appearances. You want to maximize that on the hitting side for our league. So.
Yeah, improving from awful approach to still very bad is still not great. But when you were as bad as he was, there was a risk that he could take a small step backwards and just be completely off the radar, right? He Correct. Was very close to having an approach that kept him out of the league. Now he can give back his small gains and he'll still be in the league. He'll just be, last year's Brenton Doyle, which wasn't great. Tyler Stephenson shows up 4th on this list, which does highlight the fact that if we're talking about year-to-year improvers, we're also going to be hitting on a lot of guys just coming off of down years, which describes Stephenson to a certain extent. And he's not having a great year so far this year. A 99 WRC plus is nothing special according to the results, but he's hitting the ball very hard. He's added over 10 points to his hard hit rate, one of the highest marks on this list. And that's while also making much more contact. And again, not chasing quite as much, a smaller difference in chasing for him, but the other two changes are quite large. So Tyler Stephenson, this mostly probably just looks like health, and if you ignored him too much coming off that down year, probably going to regret it.
Yeah, I think the big reason I was off of Stephenson entering the season was really the lack of power. 13 home runs and 517 plate appearances last year. And Erik, like you said, maybe that's just a down year and he's a little bit better than that. The huge thing for me with Tyler Stephenson is the uptick in power. 10 barrels already. Only 3 home runs to show for it. And that's one of my big things that I look at is how many barrels have you hit versus how many home runs have you hit. Tyler Stephenson has really kind of deserved, especially in Great American Small Park, you deserve probably 6 or 7 home runs off of those 10 barrels, and he only has 3. So this is another one. And to see the kind of sew up that point, to see the uptick in power while also improving the plate skills. Like, he's not just totally selling out for this uptick in power that we haven't seen before from Tyler Stephenson. That part of the package, and this is why I like this board, is you are looking at, kind of those three different facets, is very impressive for Tyler Stephenson, and the results haven't really shown it out yet. He's hitting .211 with 3 home runs, but the skills look really, really good, especially at catcher.
Yeah, so promising buy low there, assuming the health remains fine for Tyler Stephenson. Of course, that's the issue with all guys with health issues. You can't just look at April and say, well, those are gone now, but still pretty encouraging. How about Willy Adames? Speaking of players coming off of down years, that certainly describes him. And I think the thing to note here with Willy Adames is that the biggest change he's making across these three is his chase rate. He made one of the largest decreases in O-swing percentage on this chart here. And for somebody who has consistently struck out too much and been too much of a free swinger, that's a great thing to see, because he does the other things pretty well.
And again, and still doing those other things well with the improvement in plate approach. So it's not just like, okay, now I'm going to focus on hitting, now I'm going to focus on chasing less and being less aggressive and making more contact. And sometimes that can be at the expense of your power. That is not the case with Willy Adames, who, I agree, man, is coming off of a down season. So to look at a year-to-year improver versus 2023, I think he's going to improve anyway, just sheer baseline talent level for Willy Adames. The other thing that I really like to see with Willy Adames is Milwaukee's letting him run. He's 5 for 6 so far on the base pass. I believe a career high of 8 stolen bases, and looks like Willy Adames is on pace to blow that away and maybe get in double digits for stolen bases. So kind of a complete package type of like recency bias rebound guy here, especially if these early plate skills, the K rate going down from, he's always been kind of upper 20%, which you don't want to see, to go down to 21%. That's a big driver for Willy Adames's uptick in batting average, hitting .266 this year. It to me, it all looks legit so far, through 5-6 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I am very encouraged by Adames as well. I think we can probably breeze through Kyle Tucker and Trey Turner. I mean, these are first rounders, and now Turner's injured, so they're playing a little bit better. Well, I guess Turner fits into the bounce back bucket, and that just makes his injury even more disappointing. But let's go to the next guy on here, Alec Bohm. And Alec Bohm is someone who I've been asked about a couple times as a Phillies guy, because everybody else is getting really excited about Alec Bohm. And I was preaching caution, because the strikeout rate is basically the same as last year. The hard hit rate is basically the same as last year. Now, of course, to find himself on this board today, it does have to be technically a little bit better than last year. And it is. But Bohm has made a big improvement in his chase rate. He's cut that down by nearly 9 points, down to 20.5%. And that's significant. And it shows up in his walk rate, too. He's traditionally been a subpar walk guy. Now he's up near 11%. So that, I think, even if Alec Bohm's bat isn't very different, if it's marginally better, as we're seeing here, and he's choosing better pitches to swing at, that is a real potentially sustainable change here for Alec Bohm, do we think?
It's like a Stephen Quanian plate approach now. I did not expect this type of improvement from Alec Bohm. It's and I think I was one of the I guess scores of folks saying, last year was probably Alec Bohm's high water mark, where he hit 20 home runs, 274 over 611 plate appearances. But I could see a repeat of that happening. And the big thing, I mean, and I know not to puff your Phillies fandom here, but playing every day in that lineup, like Alec Bohm quietly had 97 RBI. You get those hidden runs in RBI from Alec Bohm when you put the ball in play this much on a team like that and play every day. That helps those kind of hidden counting stats. And so I think that's a tip in Bohm's cap there. So I don't see I don't know. I don't see a major step forward from Bohm, and certainly not going to continue hitting 364. Like, the BABIP's just wild, but a repeat of 2023, I think, is certainly in play. And again, given where the market was on Alec Bohm, again, myself included, I think that's going to be a pretty profitable pick where Bohm was going in drafts.
Yeah, I am whiffing on it as well. I just thought that the whole picture didn't quite add up to as much as we wanted it to be, but it might be now. And like you said, that lineup spot, excellent. Cleaning up in this lineup has helped him to 32 RBI already this season. That's tied for the league lead.
Wow.
Next on this list, Christian Walker, making most of his gains just in hard hit rate. Looks like he's up with right behind Tyler Stephenson for the largest gain in hard hit rate among this group, and making modest gains in the pitches he chooses to swing at and his contact rate. So a decent season here for Christian Walker. Good to see him not losing his skills and even hitting the ball harder at age 33.
Yeah, love to see that, and love to see the barrel rate. Really, like you said, it's the uptick in power that's really driving all this. Christian Walker is 4th in Major League Baseball. All of Major League Baseball in barrels was 17, behind only, well, we'll probably talk about Salvador Perez shortly. Behind Juan Soto with 19, Salvador Perez has 18, and Shohei Ohtani's just on another planet with 26 barrels, which is just crazy to see. But Christian Walker always, kind of has been a plus power hitter. 36 home runs and 33 home runs the last 2 seasons. He's taking that power to another level to where like 40 plus is in play. Certainly, I don't think he keeps up like a 19% barrel rate or what you have on here with a 51% hard hit. Like that's so good. It's hard to keep. But given how much Christian Walker plays, guy plays every single day, health permitting, but 660 plus plate appearances each of the last 2 seasons. I think 40 plus is in play. It's been impressive to see Christian Walker grow like this, kind of in the middle stage of his career.
Yeah, for sure. Moving on to Salvador Perez, who you mentioned there. I don't know if I noticed just how good his numbers are this season, hitting 339, a 985 OPS, 174 WRC plus there. Most significantly, he's cut his strikeout rate down to 11.5%, and we can see that in our chart here because he's made a huge increase in his contact rate, although you'll notice it's still just white on this chart. He hasn't gotten his contact rate up to green, but he has increased it by nearly 12 percentage points, and he's still chasing all the time a bright red on his O swing there, but he's technically doing that a little bit less than he did before, so he fits in here. But basically, he's just making contact at way more pitches and hitting them hard more often. That's a pretty good way to have a hot month. I don't know if I want to say that there's too much else going on here, but pretty impressive April from Salvador Perez.
Yeah, and he's also been injured like 15 times throughout this month, and just like repeatedly. I mean, that's the life of a catcher, but it's just like rinse repeat with Salvador Perez. Leaves a game or gets dinged up, and then next day he's in the lineup, he's catching. And not only is he doing that, but yeah, I'm with you. I did not realize the offensive production so far. And it's kind of like Salvador Perez staying true to himself. He's still chasing all the time. That's not going to change. The big thing is that jump in contact rate to where it's better than average, which for Salvador Perez is a massive, massive step forward. And the power has still been there. I'm not going to, say this is going to happen, but I mean, a mere 3 years ago, man, Salvador Perez hit 48 home runs and hit 273. Not saying that's in the cards again, but like, this is a guy who has really, of anyone on this page, maybe outside of Tatis and Shohei Ohtani, has been an elite producer over a full season in MLB. And he's starting to look like 22 and 23. Those last 2 years, he's going to blow that out of the water.
Yeah, and if you were like me thinking that there was no chance of him getting back to anything close to 2021, same. Yeah, I mean, that was reasonable. He'd had 2 down years since then, and he's a 33, 34-year-old catcher.
He's old.
You don't tend to turn back time, but he has so far. I'm going to move us to the next tab in just a second, where we're going to look at some hitters who emerged late in the draft. But if there's anyone on the bottom half of this chart who really stood out to you, I'll just list off the names for our listeners. These guys, again, they've improved in their O swing, their contact rate, and their hard hit rate, all 3 of them, although the guys towards the end of this list, pretty small improvements. The remainder, Teoscar Hernandez, Fernando Tatis, Shohei Ohtani, Willy Castro, Taylor Ward, Yainer Diaz, Ahmed Rosario, JT Realmuto, Ryan Mountcastle, Keibert Ruiz, Nolan Jones, and Jeff McNeil. Any of those stand out as ones who deserve a full paragraph?
I'll go Teoscar. I'll go Teoscar Hernandez just because, again, the lineup, we were talking about this with Andy Pajes earlier, the lineup context is just so good. If Teoscar Hernandez continues to hold these skill gains over a full season in LA's lineup, I think we're in for like a massive season. Just has to stay healthy. He's been someone where like the results and the skills have even lagged because he's been hurt and playing hurt and that sort of thing, had oblique injuries and whatnot over the course of the last couple seasons. So good to see Teoscar Hernandez healthy and mashing.
Yeah, for sure. I'll mention real quick Ahmed Rosario. There was a comment here. Somebody had to let him go in a few leagues. Unfortunate to see him on this list after that. I think it's worth noting that we wanted to see Ahmed Rosario going to Tampa, an organization that can get the most out of its players. Looks like we're seeing multiple small changes at once. So exactly what we were hoping for there. Also, a comment, I don't get why Keibert Ruiz is on this list. He's been absolutely unusable. Yeah, that's true. But this signifies that at least he's making some tiny skills gains. He is at the bottom of this list, though. So Keibert Ruiz, basically the same guy as last year, but maybe showed a tiny bit in the underlying numbers.
Yep.
Moving on to what I've called the undrafted hitters here. These are players who were selected in at most a quarter of RotoWire online championship leagues. And look at the top there in the team column. We've got Cleveland at the top here. Brian Rocchio, David Fry, and Will Brennan, the three biggest improvers by my metric here in these three skills we're talking about today. So, wow, we wondered why Cleveland was off to a hot start. It's because all of their lesser players are suddenly better than they used to be.
Yeah, sensing a theme here. So, to me, one of the takeaways from this too is Cleveland is just from like a streaming standpoint, pitching against them, they are a tough lineup to get through. They're all kind of the same guy. There's really not a lot of power there, but the plate skills are just so good. And that's what we're seeing with Rocchio Fry and Will Brennan, that it's just, they work counts. It is tough for a pitcher to get through that lineup efficiently, even if they're not giving up home runs and that sort of thing. So just kind of a side note based on what I've seen, rooting for my pitchers against Cleveland. It's been frustrating. Of these three, of Brian Rocchio, David Fry, and Will Brennan, I love Will Brennan. I think Will Brennan is a fantastic. We talk about him all the time on the Bubba and the Bloom podcast. He is a platooner, but he's one of those like weekly streamers in weeks where Cleveland faces a bunch of right-handed pitching, and I believe they get a good number of righties this coming week. Will Brennan is absolutely startable in definitely in 15s and in 12-team formats as well. And we're seeing that with the 20% uptick in hard hit rate. That's really good for Will Brennan and running a little bit as well. Brian Rocchio is interesting to me too. The thing is, like, he's hitting 213, so we're not seeing really any batting average production out of the gains. A lot of that is a low BABIP. He runs, so you're getting stolen bases, but there is like not much power there. That's the only bad part. The bright red 26% hard hit rate. I don't know how much production that's going to lead to for Brian Rocchio.
Yeah. Speaking of Will Brennan, I was surprised at the coloring on this chart for Will Brennan. He is, at least if you look at his results, he's a contact over power guy very much. Well, at least last year. Didn't actually have a high batting average, but he only struck out 12.5% of the time with a hard hit rate in the 20s. But this year, that hard hit rate has jumped up just shy of 50%, and he still is chasing a ton. He actually chased a ton last year, too. He just makes contact a lot. He basically just last year swings at everything and pokes weak ground outs all the time. And this year, that contact is suddenly harder. That's a pretty interesting way to take the next step. So definitely intrigued about him, especially this week. Like you mentioned, 6 righties facing Cleveland this week. Josh Rojas is the next guy on the list, and I agree with our commenter PJ here. Josh Rojas is going to be a hot ad tonight. About as hot of a hot ad as you can be for, a 29-year-old career utility man. But in those terms, as exciting as you can get, improving in multiple different ways, big improvements, I would say, across the board here. He's not one like Brenton where he's high up on this list just because he's done a ton in one area. But Josh Rojas making better swing decisions, hitting the ball more often, and hitting the ball harder. He's also hitting more fly balls, which isn't on this list, but it's good to see too. If you've ever seen a guy do all the things at once, it's pretty encouraging. And Josh Rojas was pretty close to an interesting player. So I think if you go from nearly interesting across the board to yes, interesting across the board, that's big.
It is, and as I pull up as I have already up my RotoWire projected pitcher grid, I see that Seattle gets 7 games and 6 of which are against right-handed pitching. And that's the thing with Josh Rojas is he is a platoon bat, but he's not only playing every day against right-handed pitching, he's leading off in front of, yes, admittedly somewhat terrible lineup so far in Seattle. Like I want Julio Rodriguez to get going, but you are going to get a ton of plate appearances from Josh Rojas playing everywhere and leading off against right-handed pitching. This is also someone who has, in Arizona, Josh Rojas has a year where he stole 23 bags, hit 9 home runs, hit 270 in 2022. Like there is some track record here. You are riding a heater. That is kind of what this is. But while he's hot, while he's leading off every single day, I think Josh Rojas, and this is validation that he shows up on your kind of all 3 skill improvements from last year. Josh Rojas, I think, is an excellent add, and I think eligible second and third base. So that middle corner is super, super useful.
Yeah, for sure. And that's going to push him maybe a bit higher in the bids just because there's going to be more people who could use him in their roster. But I think pretty much everybody wants Josh Rojas down near the bottom of their roster right now. Yep. Next guy on this list, Nolan Schanuel. This is good to see because Schanuel showed some things, but was just so weird as a rookie last year. More walks than strikeouts, but also virtually no power. He had 1 homer, but a 2.2% barrel rate and a 25% hard hit rate for a first baseman. And doesn't run at all. This isn't like a Tyler Black situation where it's a guy who looks like a shortstop, but who just plays first base. This year, Schanuel, he's taken steps forward in all of these areas. He's hitting the ball harder. He's not hitting it hard yet, but he's hitting it harder. And he's simultaneously chasing less and making a tiny bit more contact. So if you liked Schanuel as an outlier who does a couple things well, I think this is encouraging.
It's encouraging. I'm still pretty low on Schanuel, like until I see, and it is nice to see the hard hit rate go up, and actually, like you said, quite a bit. That 8.7% uptick in hard hit rate to go up 9% and still be at 34% hard hit rate. Like that, it was terrible last year for Nolan Schanuel, and I understand it was his rookie year. Like, you don't want to write the book on someone after one season. So he still improved a lot, but not to the point where and I think the lack of power kind of trumps everything here. Like you can have a really good plate approach. You can make contact, but if the power's not there, it's kind of similar to what I was talking about with Brian Rocchio. It kind of it lowers that batting average ceiling quite a bit. And so Nolan Schanuel, I still think he's another power uptick away from being really usable even in 15 teamers. That said, in OBP and points leagues, again, the plate approach is so good that he helps there. And along the Josh Rojas line of thinking, leading off every day for the Angels, which is, playing time on bad teams is still a lot of playing time. So there is that.
Yeah, very true. And I would agree. He definitely needs another power uptick to be properly interesting, but at least you can now dream on 12 homers. That's more than you could dream on last year.
Yeah.
Last year, again, 1. So 1 in 132 plate appearances. I guess that's about 4.5 over a full season. I want to move us to the pitchers soon, but just highlight a couple more interesting players on this list, particularly if there are guys on this list who are being talked about already for other reasons. I'm pretty intrigued. Joe Adell showing up on here is good to see. He's improved his chase rate by a tiny bit. That still shows up as red. He's improved his contact rate by a good amount. That still shows up as red as well. But he's also improved his hard hit rate a ton. The second largest improvement in hard hit rate, just behind Will Brennan. He's up to 51%, an improvement of 11.6 points there. So Joe Adell doing all the right things. This is good to see if you have already bought into that breakout.
Absolutely. Great to and the playing time leash is long given the extensive list of injuries to basically everyone on the Angels. And I think having a new manager in Anaheim, having Ron Washington there, I think can only help Joe Adell. It is great to see the uptick in hard contact like that. And again, he's gonna play. They don't really have anyone else to threaten Joe Adell.
I've got one more name on this list, but first, do you have anybody who's caught your eye in the middle or bottom of this undrafted hitters list?
Yeah, I'll throw two out there. One is Dylan Moore, keeping things local to the Pacific Northwest. Dylan Moore is basically playing every day in filling in for J.P. Crawford against lefties and righties for the Mariners, and nice to see the uptick in all three skills that you're looking at here. So Dylan Moore's interesting to me. And then also Vidal Brujan of the Miami Marlins there's no power here. So he shows up on your sheet, but the hard hit is still deep red, 26% hard hit rate. There's not much to no power with Vidal Brujan, but I think he's been playing second and third base for Miami, making a ton of contact and running. Stole 2 bases on Friday night. And putting bat on ball with ease. And so in the wake of the Luis Arias trade, I think playing time could be there for Vidal Brujan if you need steals.
Yeah, it's a good shout. Definitely interested in Brujan. Not expecting greatness, but want to have him on my team just in case that this starts to work out and we start to see more of the player he was as a prospect. The guy I was going to mention, Jacob Young, he's running all the time. And so if that was already enough reason to be interested him in deeper leagues and maybe even pushing into those 12-team leagues, the fact that he's also hitting the ball better than he did last year, not necessarily well, but the hard hit rate, 36%, that's not as deep a red as some of the guys on here. And he's also chasing less and hitting the ball more when he does swing. So that's good. And I'll also mention Davis Schneider, who had a question here. Can either of you explain why Toronto benches Schneider so much? Not necessarily. I guess maybe they don't love his defense or something, because it's certainly not related to his bat. The bat's really good, and he's even striking out less. He had a strikeout problem last year, right? He was the classic high barrel rate, high strikeout rate guy, and you just don't know if that's going to work over a larger sample. But he's striking out less, and as you can see here, he's chasing less. He's making more contact when he swings, although still in the red there. And his hard hit rate is better than it was last year. So if you're a David Schneider head, like I think probably both of us are to some extent, I think you'd be encouraged.
Agreed. And agreed. Cannot back up Toronto management on this one for why he's not getting everyday playing time. He should.
We are going to get to our pitchers after this quick message from Vivid Seats. Finally, baseball is back this MLB season. Knock it out of the park with Vivid Seats and score great tickets to the biggest games of the year. Every fastball, every home run, and every eye-popping play of your favorite team live and in person. Plus, with Vivid Seats rewards, you earn rewards with every single purchase. Just buy 10 tickets, then cash in your credit toward your free 11th ticket. Talk about an easy win. And here's a pro reward tip. When buying tickets for your whole group, split the bill and make progress toward your free 11th ticket even faster. From behind the dugout to the upper deck, Vivid Seats has great tickets for all the 2024 games that matter to you. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats, experience it live. See vividseats.com/rewards for terms and conditions. Back here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast, moving on to our look at the pitchers, which are improving in multiple areas at once this season. The metrics I chose here are strikeout rate, walk rate, and ground ball rate. Those first two should be pretty uncontroversial. I know some people don't look at ground ball rate as necessarily purely good or bad, but more describing the type of pitcher someone is. But I think on the whole, all else being equal, I would certainly rather have a pitcher have a higher ground ball rate than a lower one. So I still certainly factor it in. I'm not sure about you, Ryan.
No, I agree. I think it's certainly much less important than strikeout and walk rate, ground ball rate is. And we see this with like Garrett Cole, Max Scherzer. They allow fly balls and home runs, but they're still Garrett Cole and Max Scherzer. So very much a tertiary metric. Where I use ground ball rate is at the extremes. I don't, if someone's in the 40s and 30s, like kind of that middle of the road for ground ball rate, I believe the league average is like 42, 43% ish. If you've got, we'll talk about a couple of these guys that are above 50. Those guys are very interesting to me. The ones who kind of that Framber Valdez approach, where if you have above a 50% ground ball rate, it's just so it's hard not to have a decent ERA. So I certainly use strikeout and walk the most, and then ground ball rate I do look at it for those outliers. So.
All right. So the first guy on this list, I should mention these lists were put together yesterday, Saturday, so they don't have Saturday starts in there. That won't affect too many of these guys. But Jack Flaherty is the top riser using this metric. I summed the changes in all three stats to order these guys. Jack Flaherty, an outstanding season so far, 34% strikeout rate, 3.4% walk rate. His ground ball rate basically the same, but is up half a point. And so he qualifies for this list. But really, it's those first two. When you add 11 points to your strikeout rate while subtracting 7 points from your walk rate, you're probably having a good season.
Yes, and I think the world kind of woke up to Jack Flaherty on his last start with those 14 strikeouts. Still has a 4 flat ERA on the season. So the underlying like skills, the way Jack Flaherty's pitching right now, he's like a mid-twos guy. I certainly don't expect that either, but at least up until Jack Flaherty's last start, he was, I think, kind of being slept on. Even diving a little bit deeper than this, the strikeout walk rates for Jack Flaherty. This is someone who I was actually on in the end game because he was one of the pitchers with the highest uptick in velocity from second half to first half last season. And Jack Flaherty has even taken that fastball velocity a step further in 2024. It's up to 93.8 miles an hour. He's throwing it for strikes, and he's got a slider and curveball that both miss a ton of bats, a 20% swinging strike rate on both of those secondary pitches. So he has a great fastball that he can throw for strikes. That's why you're seeing the walk rate so low for Jack Flaherty. And he's got those 2 put-away pitches on the secondaries, which is why you're seeing a 34% K rate. So no, he's not this good. Nobody holds a non-Jacob deGrom division. Nobody holds a 34% K rate and a 3% walk rate over a full season. But this Jack Flaherty re-breakout, I don't know, given his career, is legit. And through 144 innings last year, like this is a guy who could go 150, 160. Any injury can happen at any time to starting pitchers. But he at least has shown Flaherty has the workload last season to kind of keep this up over a full season.
Yeah, I'm also noticing for my spreadsheet here, anybody following along, I have messed up the coloring on this walk rate. He should be a bright green. So you can take back all your compliments earlier about how good the spreadsheet
I take it
was.
Back. That's right. Rookie mistake.
Horrible stuff here. That should be a bright green on Jack Flaherty's walk rate. It should also be bright green on Ranger Suarez's 3.5% walk rate. That is still 3.5% after his start last night. His strikeout rate is down from 27.8 to 26.9. And his ground ball rate is also down a couple points after last night's start. But Ranger Suarez still an outstanding start to the season. Significant improvements in both the strikeouts and walks. Even if all of those are gone and he just goes back to being a league average strikeout and walk guy who gets a ton of grounders, I still think that I'm going to be very happy with how many shares of Ranger Suarez I have. I think that the market just forgot about him. Ranger Suarez has been totally fine. There's a lot of pitchers who are unremarkable in strikeouts and walks and get a lot of grounders and pitch for a good team and have had success before, and he just wasn't drafted near them, and I don't know why. So even if none of what he showed in April is true, I still think Ranger Suarez is better than everybody else seems to think. But the question is, is he maybe going to continue being this Ranger Suarez or something close to it?
So when I look at that, to answer that last question, Erik, when I look at that, I look at the strikeout rate and I compare it to a swinging strike. right? That's very tightly correlated. How often are you missing bats versus how much are you striking out? And just a general rule of thumb, if you take a player's whiff rate, a swinging strike, just multiply it by 2, you might get their K rate. For Ranger Suarez, it's a 10% swinging strike rate, which is below average. And so I would expect Ranger Suarez's strikeout rate to drop somewhat significantly down to the low 20s. Now, he can do that and still, basically what you were saying, he can do that and still be very good. This is kind of like the Logan Webb path, where like the strikeouts aren't that great, the walks are good, but it's the ground ball rate, and this is why I'm glad you have it on the list. A 61% ground ball rate for Ranger Suarez. That is, like, once you get above 50, it's really good. The returns get exponentially better as you go up to 55 to 60%. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying. It's almost hard for Ranger Suarez to not have a bad ERA because he gets so many ground balls. A 61% ground ball rate is certainly getting it done. And he does it with all 4 of his pitches. Ranger Suarez basically throws 4 pitches: a sinker, curve, 4-seam, and changeup. Gets 60% or better ground balls on all 4 of those pitches. So, like, this is just the guy he is. And as long as you're getting that many ground balls, I don't really care too much about strikeout and walk. If those are just league average, you've got a really good pitcher here.
For sure. The next guy on the list here, Spencer Turnbull. This just shows how exciting the start to his season has been. However, seems like he's going to be moving to the bullpen, some sort of piggyback role for a bit. He certainly pitched well enough that he deserves to be in the Phillies rotation, but coming off of injuries, he was going to hit workload restrictions at some point. But this is a reminder of how exciting he's been so far and what we can maybe expect if he's starting again. The next guy on this list, though, Tanner Houck. This seems to be validating a Tanner Houck breakout. He's made improvements in all 3 areas, and both his strikeout rate and walk rate moving in the right direction by over 5 points.
Yes, and it's a lot of the, whenever I look at these, Tanner Houck did throw 106 innings last year and pitch some length, but whenever I look at these kind of bullpen to starting rotation transitions, I look how does the pitch mix change? Is he still going all out with 2 pitches and that sort of thing? With Tanner Houck, the big thing for me is his split finger that has developed into a legitimate, if not excellent, third pitch, in addition to the sinker slider guy that Tanner Houck has been over the last few seasons. That split finger misses a ton of bats and gets a ton of ground balls. 76% ground ball rate for Tanner Houck on that splitter, which basically tells me he can get a ground ball whenever he wants. He just needs to throw that split finger the way he's been locating it, and it's working for him. Workload wise, I'm not that concerned. Like I said, the 106 innings for Tanner Houck last year, he can certainly build upon that and go 130, 140 in today's game. That's a darn near full workload for a starting pitcher. So, this is, I guess, like a buy high for Tanner Houck. He's not going to have a 2.18 ERA, but I think he can stick in the low 3s given what we've seen from Tanner Houck so far.
Very encouraging for sure. The next guy on the list, Ryan Feltner. I guess this partially explains why people are at least saying his name this year, but he's only improved up to league average-ish across the board and plays in Colorado. So I guess this is your validation for thinking of Ryan Feltner as an away streamer, but nothing more than that.
Agreed. I've called it Feltnered a few times.
Yeah.
Everyone talks about being Gombered in the past from Austin Gomber. I have felt the Ryan Feltner blow because the skills look pretty good and you want to stream them and it just blows up. Agreed. This is someone who is a road streamer only. Ryan Feltner has decent skills if you get him in the right matchup. I believe he's a 2-step this week, or this past week, I should say, not this upcoming week. He faces Pittsburgh on Sunday and should have shut out the Marlins on Monday, but did not. Went to the 9th, and the Rockies gave up 5 runs in the 9th to not give him the win. You can tell I streamed Ryan Feltner this week, right?
you know very well what Ryan Feltner's been up to.
A road streamer,
yeah.
And a decent one at that. Just be mindful of the schedule.
Yeah. Next up, we have Brendan Pfaadt here. This does not include his start yesterday, so his strikeout and walk numbers are both slightly different, but he is up in strikeouts, down in walks, and up in grounders. The whole picture Still hasn't added up to a great starter, but if you wanted to see him take steps forward in year 2, I guess we have those.
Yes, I think so. I think you look at the pitch mix here. Brandon Pfaadt is throwing, and the big thing for me is that that walk rate at 4.1%. He is throwing strikes consistently with his top 3 pitches: his four-seamer, sweeper, and sinker. And one of the metrics I look at, and this is pretty intuitive, but it's ball percentage. It's just basically how often are you throwing strikes, or how often are you not throwing balls, and that correlates very tightly with walk rate. And Brandon Pfaadt has made huge gains in his ball percentage, so I think the elite walk rate can be there. And Brandon Pfaadt has this sweeper that just misses a ton of bats, specifically against right-handed hitters. So maybe some changes against lefties are due, but I think Brandon Pfaadt is taking a step forward, and we're not really seeing it in the surface stats. A 4.61 ERA for Brandon Pfaadt. A lot of those ERA indicators are down near the low to mid 3s. So I'm encouraged by what we've seen so far from Brandon Pfaadt, even if the results haven't necessarily been there.
Yeah, we've tried to highlight some of the guys who look more like buy lows today, and I think that probably fits perhaps here with Brandon Pfaadt. We are over an hour, so I'm not going to keep you too much longer. I just want to note 1 or 2 more on this pitching list. Joe Ryan stands out for me because he always had good strikeout and walk numbers, but had very low ground ball rates, the sort that you were talking about with those outliers. Maybe you worry there that he was going to have an unsolvable home run problem. Well, if he's got his ground ball rate all the way up to 40%, whereas for his career it's sitting, below 30 heading into the season, that's encouraging. And to be doing that while making slight gains into strikeout and walk rates, I think you like to see that for Joe Ryan.
Agreed. And another thing is the homer to fly has gone down. I think home run to fly ball rate is mostly outside of a pitcher's control. Joe Ryan was destroyed by that last year. 15% home run to fly ball rate. That's down to 11% this season. And if you've been paying attention to league-wide trends so far this year, the league average homer to fly ball rate is down quite a bit as well. I don't know if that is baseball related or not, like physical baseball related or not. Right. I have my hunch. But targeting some of these extreme fly ball guys that like Joe Ryan has been in his career. I know you just said the ground ball rate has improved a little bit, and that's nice to see. In a potentially dead ball season, maybe some of these extreme fly ballers are targetable, because a fly ball that does not end up as a home run is almost always an out. So it helps your whip.
That is very true. Any other guys on this list stand out to you? I've got maybe 1 or 2, but I'll turn it over to you first.
Graham Ashcraft sticks out to me. Has always been one of those stuff over results guy. Getting to a 53% or 52% ground ball rate in Great American Ballpark is certainly good. Ryan Weathers is another one. I was a little skeptical on Ryan Weathers given his past, but nice to see. Yes, a league average or even below average league strikeout rate, but has improved a little bit with better velocity. So Ryan Weathers, again, like in 15-teamers, maybe a little bit more streamable, but those are some of the bigger ones.
Yeah, good call there. I'll note Ronel Blanco. Not entirely sure how good he is still, but there are underlying skills changes compared to last year. Only really slight changes in the strikeout and walk rate. And again, that dark green should be a dark red on his walk rate, but way more grounders while getting slightly better in the other areas. That seems like it could be something. And Reed Detmers also only a very small increase in small increase in strikeout rate, but he's cut 2 points from his walk rate while adding 7 points to his ground ball rate. You like to see that from Reed Detmers, somebody who's gotten a medium level of buzz for a little bit now. I think this is a way that he could be taking a step forward.
Agreed. Luis Severino on there as well. I kind of glossed over him. Nice to see that rebound in Queens. And finally, Kyle Harrison. The improvement in walk rate for me with Kyle Harrison is big. As a prospect, Kyle Harrison has that stuff, but the control hasn't been there at least most of his minor league career. So nice to see some improvement there as well.
Yeah, good shout. And for anyone who was not following along with our visuals and wants to see the rest of the list, I will share this spreadsheet on my Twitter, and I'll fix the colors first. Can't have something as unprofessional as mixing up my reds and greens. Unacceptable.
Happens to the best of us. Happens to the best. It has happened to me. Trust me.
Good. Means a lot coming from you, Ryan. Thank you. And I think that's going to wrap up our show for today. So, Ryan, thank you very much for spending your Sunday morning with me. Anything you'd like to plug on your way out the door, like, for example, one of my favorite podcasts?
Yeah, thanks again, Erik, for having me on. I know we took a little bit of time to get this going, but happy to be able to join you. Yes, the Bubba and the Bloom podcast that I co-host with my good friend KC Bubba, Brian Entrikin. We stream live Tuesday and Thursday nights. And Erik, you are hopping in the chat with us, which we greatly appreciate. It's a fun little chat room as we go, even though it is later at night. Our podcast drop on Wednesday and Friday mornings. We do a fad preview for the upcoming year, or for the upcoming week, sorry. And our Wednesday episode is something similar to what you just saw here, where we come up with a Bloom board and visual on the screen and kind of just talk through some players. So Bubba and the Bloom podcast and my work at Baseball HQ as well.
Yeah, thanks again, Ryan, and highly recommend that one. You guys really figured out how to work in the visuals, the chat, and everything, and got a great live stream going on over there. So thank you, Ryan. Thank you, listeners. Thank you to our sponsor, Prize Picks. And we'll be back with Jeff and Scott tonight on the Late Show going over today's fab. Thank you, everybody. Back every day this week on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast.